Picture this. You wake up, not to an alarm clock, but to the sound of wooden sandals clicking against polished floors, knowing that your entire existence revolves around the whims of a man who might not even remember your name. Welcome to the life of a concubine in feudal Japan, where being chosen for your beauty was less like winning the lottery, and more like being sentenced to a gilded cage with very, very specific job requirements. Tonight, we're peeling back the silk curtains and paper screens to reveal what life was really like for these women, trapped between privilege and powerlessness. So dim those lights, maybe turn on a gentle fan for some white noise, and settle in as we explore the intricate, often brutal world that existed behind the elegant facades of Japan's most powerful households, the daily reality of concubine life. You are Hanako, a 16-year-old girl from a minor samurai family that has fallen on hard times. Your father's debts have mounted, and the rice harvest has failed again. When Lord Matsudaira's representative arrives at your modest home, your parents see salvation. You see the end of everything you've ever known. The negotiation happens around you, not with you. Your bride price, or rather, your concubine price, is settled at 12 gold pieces and the forgiveness of your family's debt to the domain. You are not consulted. This is 1680, and women are property, to be transferred from father to lord as easily as a horse or a piece of land. Your first morning in the lord's compound begins before dawn. The head concubine, Madame Yoshino, a woman whose beauty has long since faded, but whose political acumen has kept her relevant, shakes you awake. Sleep, you quickly learn, is a luxury you'll rarely enjoy in full. Your schedule is not your own. You rise and immediately begin the complex process of preparing yourself for potential summons. This is not the simple morning routine you knew at home. Every aspect of your appearance must be perfect, because you never know when Lord Matsudaira might desire your presence. Your teeth must be blackened with a mixture of iron filings and vinegar, a process that stings your gums and leaves a metallic taste that never quite fades. The fashion among noble women demands this sacrifice of your natural beauty for artificial perfection. Your eyebrows must be shaved completely and then painted back on higher up your forehead, creating an alien appearance that supposedly enhances your allure. The process is painful and must be repeated every few days as stubble appears. The razor is dull, and nicks are common. There is no sympathy for cuts or irritation. The white face powder, made from ground rice and lead, is applied so thickly that your natural features disappear entirely. You become a porcelain doll, beautiful and artificial. The lead slowly poisons you, though you won't understand this for years. Many older concubines suffer from tremors and strange ailments that no one connects to their daily beauty ritual. Your lips are painted small and bright red, creating a rosebud effect that makes you look perpetually surprised or slightly pained. The paint tastes bitter and chips throughout the day, requiring constant touch-ups. Your hair, once your pride, is now an instrument of display. It must be arranged in increasingly complex styles that require hours to complete, and leave your scalp aching from the weight of ornaments and the tight pulling required to maintain the elaborate shapes. You sleep with your neck elevated on a wooden pillow to preserve the style, resulting in neck pain and restless nights. The kimono you wear is exquisite, worth more than your family's annual income, but it is also a prison. The multiple layers weigh nearly 20 pounds. The obi, the wide sash around your waist, is tied so tightly that breathing deeply becomes impossible. You move in small, shuffling steps, the restrictive clothing ensuring you can never run, never move with natural freedom. Your day is structured around waiting. You wait in the common room with the other concubines, maintaining perfect posture for hours. Your back aches constantly from sitting in the formal sessar position, but slouching is unthinkable. You wait for meals, which are served at specific times and consist of small, delicate portions that leave you always slightly hungry. Robust appetite is considered unseemly in a woman of your position. You wait for lessons. Unlike the main wife, you are not expected to manage household affairs, but you must be accomplished in the arts that please men. You spend hours practicing the koto, a stringed instrument whose music is supposed to soothe and enchant. Your fingertips become raw from the strings. You study poetry, learning to compose verses that express longing and melancholy in precisely 17 syllables. Your own feelings are irrelevant. You must learn to articulate the emotions men expect from women. Tea ceremony occupies much of your time. Every movement must be precise, every gesture meaningful. You spend weeks learning to fold a cloth in exactly the right way, to pour water at precisely the correct angle. The ceremony is meditation through repetition, but for you it becomes a form of mental imprisonment. Your natural spontaneity is systematically eliminated. You wait for calligraphy practice, where your hand must learn to create characters of perfect beauty. Your wrist cramps from holding the brush at the correct angle for hours. Ink stains your fingers, and Madame Yoshino scolds you severely for the imperfection. Beautiful writing is essential. Your lord may ask you to copy poems or compose letters, and any flaw reflects poorly on his taste in women. Most of all, you wait for the summons that may or may not come. A servant appears and speaks your name, and your heart begins to race. Tonight, you will perform the duty for which you were purchased. You follow silently through the maze of corridors, your wooden sandals clicking against the polished floors like a countdown. The Lord's chambers are dimly lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on painted screens. Lord Matsudra, a man of 40 with soft hands and a face marked by years of rich food and little physical exertion, barely acknowledges your presence as you prostrate yourself before him. You are furniture, beautiful furniture, activated only when required. The intimate encounter is brief and mechanical. There is no tenderness, no conversation. You are expected to be responsive, but not too eager, submissive, but not lifeless. It is a performance with very specific requirements, and you have had no rehearsal. Afterwards, you are dismissed immediately. Lingering would be presumptuous. You return to your small room, barely larger than a closet, and carefully remove the expensive kimono. Tomorrow, you will repeat this routine, and the day after that, and for years to come. Your value depends entirely on maintaining your beauty and availability. Age is your enemy, pregnancy a complication, and independence an impossibility. The other concubines are not friends, they are competitors. Each hopes to bear a son who might elevate her status, to catch the Lord's lasting attention, to somehow transcend their purchased position. Alliances form and dissolve based on who is currently in favor. Trust is dangerous, and genuine affection is a luxury none can afford. Your family writes rarely, and when they do, the letters speak of their improved circumstances, the debt forgiven, the respect restored. You are expected to be grateful for your sacrifice. Their relief at their salvation is supposed to comfort you in your captivity. Illness is a particular terror. A concubine who cannot fulfill her duties is quickly replaced. There are no sick days, no medical care beyond basic herbal remedies. A fever, a skin condition, any imperfection that might disgust the Lord, means immediate dismissal and likely destitution. You have no trade, no family willing to take you back, no options beyond this role. The seasonal festivals that once brought joy to your childhood now mark only the passage of time in your confined existence. Cherry blossoms bloom and fall outside your window, reminding you of springs when you ran freely beneath them. Now you view them through bars, beautiful but unreachable. Your dreams at night are of your old life, of choices you might have made, of a future you will never have. You wake each morning to the reality of your situation, and begin again the ritual of preparing yourself for a life that belongs entirely to someone else. This is not the romantic vision of concubinage that later literature would create. This is the daily grinding reality of being a beautiful object in a world where women's only value lay in their ability to please and serve. You are Hanako, and you have been disappeared into a life that was never yours to live. The clicking of wooden sandals in the corridors signals another day beginning. Another day of waiting, another day of your life spent in service to desires that are not your own. The sound has become the soundtrack to your existence, marking time in a life that feels both endless and already over. Before we continue exploring the intricate world of feudal Japan's concubines, let's take a moment to check in with our community. Where are you joining us from tonight? What time is it in your corner of the world? It amazes me to see how far the reach is of our little corner of the internet, and what part of the world everyone is watching from. If you're finding these stories of forgotten lives as fascinating as I do, and if our deep exploration into history's overlooked corners brings you the same sense of calm curiosity, consider giving this video a like and subscribing to our channel. But please, only if these boring history stories truly resonate with you. I'd love to hear in the comments what historical topic you'd like us to explore next, or simply check in and let us know you're here. You're all such an important part of our growing community, and I'm grateful for your continued support. Thank you for being part of our little corner of the internet, where history's quieter voices finally get to tell their stories. Now, let's return to Hanako's world and delve deeper into the complex hierarchy and unspoken rules that governed every aspect of concubine life in feudal Japan. The cruel mathematics of beauty and time. Your position in the household hierarchy is as fluid as water and twice as treacherous. Today you might be third in the Lord's favor. Tomorrow you could be forgotten entirely. The ranking system among concubines is never officially announced, but everyone knows exactly where they stand through 1,000 tiny signals that cut deeper than any blade. The allocation of rooms tells the story. The most favored concubine receives quarters closest to the Lord's chambers, with windows facing the garden and space for a personal servant. You, still new and unproven, occupy a room near the servants' quarters, where the morning sounds of cooking fires and washing wake you before dawn. The walls are thin, and privacy is a concept that exists only for those with power. Your kimono allowance reveals your status with mathematical precision. The favored receive silk so fine it seems to float, colors so rich they appear to glow in lamplight. Your garments, while still beautiful by peasant standards, are made of lesser silk, the patterns simpler, the colors more subdued. You learn to read the subtle language of textile quality like a merchant evaluates rice. The seating arrangement at the rare group gatherings follows an invisible but absolute protocol. Distance from the head concubine's cushion measures your worth in increments of tatami mats. You sit toward the back among the newer acquisitions, watching the intricate dance of precedence play out before you. Speaking out of turn could cost you weeks of disfavor. Food becomes another currency of status. The choicest morsels, the first taste of seasonal delicacies, the warmest tea, all flow to those in favor. You receive adequate nutrition, but never abundance. never the luxury of choice. You learn to be grateful for basic sustenance, while watching others feast on delicacies you'll never taste. Your education in household politics begins immediately and never ends. Madame Yoshino, the head concubine, becomes your reluctant teacher in survival. She is 43, ancient by concubine standards, but has maintained her position through cunning rather than beauty. Her lessons are harsh but necessary. Never appear too eager for his attention, she whispers during one of your beauty preparation sessions. Desperation has a smell that repels men like rotting fish. But never appear indifferent either, or you'll be forgotten before the cherry blossoms fall. You learn that pregnancy is both salvation and catastrophe. A son elevates your status permanently, ensuring comfort even when your beauty fades. But pregnancy also removes you from active duty for months, during which younger, more beautiful girls might capture the Lord's lasting attention. The older concubines speak in hushed tones of those who bore daughters, adequate for securing basic care, but never achieving true security. You learn that pregnancy is both salvation and catastrophe. A son elevates your status permanently, ensuring comfort even when your beauty fades. But pregnancy also removes you from active duty for months, during which younger, more beautiful girls might capture the Lord's lasting attention. The older concubines speak in hushed tones of those who bore daughters, adequate for securing basic care, but never achieving true security. The medical care you receive reflects your expendable nature. Minor illnesses are treated with basic herbs and rest, major ones with prayers and hope. You watch as Sakura, a concubine of 3 years, develops a persistent cough that grows worse despite treatment. When she begins losing weight, her summons become infrequent, then stop entirely. One morning her room is empty, her possessions gone, her fate unspoken but understood. Your contact with the outside world shrinks to almost nothing. Letters from family arrive infrequently and are read by Madame Yoshino before reaching you. Any news that might disturb your focus or inspire thoughts of escape is carefully edited out. You learn that your younger sister has married a local merchant, but not that she initially refused the match, hoping to join you in what she imagined was luxury. The seasonal changes that once marked natural rhythms now signal only the passage of your declining youth. Each spring festival reminds you that you are another year older, another year closer to obsolescence. You begin to notice the tiny lines around your eyes that face powder cannot entirely hide, the slight loosening of skin that no amount of careful diet can prevent. Your fellow concubines age out of favor with predictable regularity. Those who fail to bear children or whose looks fade without producing heirs simply disappear. Some are quietly married off to minor retainers, a form of honorable discharge that secures basic survival. Others are less fortunate, dismissed with a small sum and left to navigate a world that has no place for former concubines. The psychological toll grows heavier with each passing season. You develop strategies for mental survival, creating elaborate fantasy worlds during the long hours of waiting. You compose poetry in your mind that no one will ever hear. Design gardens you'll never plant. Imagine conversations with the family you rarely see. Sleep becomes elusive despite the exhaustion. The wooden pillow required to preserve your hairstyle ensures that rest comes in fragments, punctuated by neck pain and the constant fear of disturbing your carefully arranged appearance. You learn to doze while maintaining perfect posture, a skill that would be impressive if it weren't born of desperation. The religious festivals that punctuate the year offer brief respites from routine. But even these celebrations reinforce your position. You participate in ceremonies as decoration, your beauty adding to the Lord's prestige. But you are never participant, always ornament. Your prayers are for others' continued favor, never for your own freedom. This is the mathematics of concubine life, where beauty diminishes with time's passage, where worth is calculated in male pleasure, and where your highest achievement is to become so skilled at self-erasure that you forget you ever existed as anything more than a lovely, expensive object in someone else's collection. The woman who defied an empire, while you, as Hanako, navigate the suffocating world of concubinage in a provincial lord's household. There exists another realm entirely, one where women of extraordinary beauty and intelligence can achieve something approaching power. This is the floating world of the Yoshiwara Edo's licensed pleasure quarter, where the most accomplished courtesans become legends that outlive emperors. Her name was Takao, and in the late 1650s, she was the most celebrated oiran in all of Japan. Unlike the concubines, hidden away in private households, Takao lived her life on a stage where beauty, wit, and artistic accomplishment could elevate a woman to heights that even samurai wives might envy. But her story is also one of tragic defiance, of a woman who dared to love according to her own heart in a world that had purchased the right to dictate her desires. Takao was born around 1640, not in the sophisticated streets of Edo, but in a farming village in what is now Gunma Prefecture. Her original name is lost to history, erased when she was sold into the pleasure quarters at the age of 13. This erasure of identity was standard practice, part of the transformation from human being into artistic creation, from girl into oiran. The Yoshiwara was a world unto itself, a walled city of pleasure where the normal rules of Japanese society were suspended in favor of more fluid arrangements. Here, merchants could consort with artists, samurai could temporarily forget their rigid honor codes, and women could achieve fame and influence impossible elsewhere in feudal Japan. But this freedom came at an extraordinary price. Takao's training began immediately upon her arrival. Unlike the basic instruction you receive as a concubine, her education was comprehensive and demanding. She learned to play not just the koto, but the shamisen and fu as well. Her voice was trained until she could perform the most complex musical pieces flawlessly. She studied classical poetry until she could compose verses that moved hardened warriors to tears. Her education in the erotic arts was equally thorough and far more sophisticated than anything a household concubine would receive. The oiran were expected to be not merely available, but actively skilled in providing pleasure. They learned techniques passed down through generations of courtesans, methods of touch and movement that could transport clients to realms of sensation they had never imagined. But perhaps most importantly, Takao learned the art of conversation. In the Yoshiwara, clients paid not just for physical pleasure, but for intellectual stimulation. The top courtesans were expected to discuss poetry, politics, philosophy, and art with equal facility. They were living works of art themselves, accomplished in every cultural refinement that defined Japanese civilization. By her early 20s, Takao had achieved the highest rank possible in the quarter, that of Taiyu, later called oiran. She commanded fees that exceeded the annual income of most samurai. Her elaborate processions through the quarter, attended by servants and apprentices, drew crowds of admirers who came simply to glimpse her magnificent costumes and witness her stately movement. Her kimono were masterpieces of textile art, each one costing more than a house. The obi she wore weighed over 30 pounds and required assistance to tie properly. Her hair ornaments were made of gold and precious stones, creating elaborate sculptures that took hours to arrange. When she walked, she moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a goddess, each step calculated for maximum visual impact. Takao's house, the Mayaraya, was one of the most prestigious establishments in the quarter. Clients would reserve her company months in advance, and even then, she reserved the right to refuse anyone who failed to meet her standards of refinement. She was, in effect, the employer rather than the employee, commanding terms that would have been unthinkable for women in any other profession. Her artistic accomplishments became legendary throughout Edo. She composed poetry that was copied and recited in literary salons throughout the city. Her calligraphy was sought after by collectors. Her performances of classical dance were attended by members of the imperial court. She had achieved something approaching immortality through her art. But Takao's fatal flaw was her capacity for genuine love. In 1659, she began a relationship with a young samurai named Senda Yamashiro, a man of modest means but extraordinary passion. Their love affair violated the fundamental rules of the pleasure quarter, where emotions were meant to be performed rather than felt, where relationships were commercial transactions rather than matters of the heart. The details of their romance have been preserved in countless poems, plays, and stories, though separating fact from legend has become impossible. What is certain is that Takao fell deeply in love with a man who could never afford to purchase her freedom from the quarter. The standard price for buying out a top oiran was approximately 3,000 gold pieces, equivalent to several $1 million today. Yamashiro, driven by desperation and love, attempted to raise the money through increasingly dangerous means. He borrowed heavily, sold his family's ancestral swords, and finally resorted to embezzling funds from his lord's treasury. When his crimes were discovered, he faced not only financial ruin but death for his betrayal of his master's trust. Takao's response to her lover's disgrace cemented her place in Japanese legend. Rather than distance herself from the scandal, she declared her intention to die with him. On a winter night in 1659, they met secretly outside the quarter walls for the final time. What happened next depends on which version of the story you believe. Some accounts say they committed double suicide together, their bodies found frozen in each other's arms beside the Sumida River. Others claim that Takao was murdered by agents of her brothel owner, who could not allow such a valuable asset to destroy herself for love. Still, others suggest that she was secretly spirited away to live in hiding, her death staged to end the scandal. What is certain is that Takao disappeared from the historical record in early 1660, at the age of barely 20. Her house went into mourning. Her regular clients composed memorial poems, and her story began its transformation from contemporary scandal into timeless legend. The impact of her story on Japanese culture was immediate and lasting. Plays were written about her tragic love affair within years of her disappearance. Artists created woodblock prints depicting her beauty and her final moments. Poets used her story as a metaphor for the conflict between duty and desire that defined Japanese society. But perhaps more significantly, Taku's story highlighted the fundamental contradictions of the pleasure quarter system. Here was a woman who had achieved wealth, fame, and artistic recognition, who commanded respect from the most powerful men in Japan, but who remained ultimately powerless to control her own destiny. Her beauty and talent had created a golden cage, more beautiful than most prisons, but a prison nonetheless. The other courtesans of the Yoshiwara watched Takao's story unfold with a mixture of admiration and terror. She had achieved the ultimate success possible within their world, but that success had proven to be as much trap as triumph. Her fate served as a warning about the dangers of allowing genuine emotion to intrude upon commercial relationships. In the decades following her disappearance, Takao became a symbol of doomed love, of beauty destroyed by an inflexible social system, of the price women paid for attempting to claim agency over their own hearts. Her story was retold in increasingly romanticized versions, each generation adding new details to enhance the tragedy. The historical Takao was almost certainly more complex than the legend suggests. She was a shrewd businesswoman who understood how to manipulate the system that confined her. She was an artist of genuine talent who used her skills to achieve unprecedented independence. She was also a woman who ultimately chose love over security, passion over pragmatism, in a society that offered women few opportunities for either. Her legacy extends far beyond the pleasure quarters of Edo. Takao became a template for the tragic heroine in Japanese literature, a figure whose beauty and talent are ultimately destroyed by social constraints. Her story influenced countless works of art, from classical theater to modern novels, each retelling exploring different aspects of her complex relationship with freedom and captivity. Today, visitors to Tokyo can still walk through the narrow streets of what was once the Yoshiwara, though the pleasure quarter has long since been transformed into ordinary urban neighborhoods. But in the museums and theaters of the city, Takao's image remains vivid, a reminder of a world where women could achieve extraordinary heights of cultural accomplishment, while remaining fundamentally powerless over their own lives. Her story serves as a counterpoint to your experience as Hanako, the household concubine, where you face obscurity and gradual obsolescence. Takao achieved fame that has lasted for centuries. Where you have no voice in your destiny, she commanded respect and admiration from the most powerful men of her era. But ultimately, both of your stories illustrate the same fundamental truth about women's lives in feudal Japan, that even the most accomplished and celebrated women remained commodities, their value determined by their ability to please men rather than their own desires and ambitions. The cherry blossoms that Takao watched from her window in the Yoshiwara fell and bloomed again for only 20 springs before her story ended. But the legend she created in those brief years continues to blossom in the imagination of each new generation, a testament to the enduring power of love to challenge even the most rigid social constraints. The economics of fame and the price of perfection. Understanding Takao's world requires examining the brutal economics that made such legends possible. The Yoshiwara operated on a system that transformed human suffering into artistic achievement, creating beauty from bondage with mathematical precision that would have impressed any merchant. A girl like Takao, sold into the quarter at 13, immediately became a financial investment requiring years of expensive training before generating profit. Her education cost the equivalent of tens of thousands of modern dollars. Master teachers in music, dance, poetry, and calligraphy commanded premium fees. The elaborate costumes required for her eventual debut represented another fortune in silk, gold thread, and precious ornaments. The house that owned her contract, the Miyaraya, calculated her potential return on investment with the same care a rice merchant might evaluate his grain stores. Her beauty was assessed not just for immediate appeal, but for longevity. Her intelligence was measured not for personal fulfillment, but for its ability to enchant clients who might become regular patrons. Her artistic talents were developed not for self-expression, but as marketing tools in an intensely competitive marketplace. The daily routine that created and maintained Takao's perfection was as rigorous as any military training. She rose before dawn to begin the complex process of physical preparation that might take 4 to 6 hours to complete. Her skin was treated with elaborate regimens of oils, powders, and treatments designed to maintain the porcelain perfection that clients expected. Any blemish, any sign of aging, any imperfection could cost thousands in lost revenue. Her hands received particular attention, as they were constantly on display during her performances. The fingernails were carefully shaped and lacquered, the skin treated with special creams to maintain softness. She wore protective gloves during any activity that might damage her hands, making simple tasks like eating or writing elaborate productions requiring assistance. The elaborate hairstyles that became Takao's signature required teams of specialists to create and maintain. The structures, built from her own hair supplemented with expensive additions, could weigh several pounds and required hours to construct. She slept on specially designed pillows that supported these architectural achievements, sacrificing comfort for visual impact. The hair ornaments alone, made from gold, silver, and precious stones, represented wealth that could have supported entire families for years. Her wardrobe was a constantly evolving collection of textile masterpieces. Each kimono was designed for specific seasons, occasions, and moods. The undergarments, invisible to clients but essential to the overall effect, were themselves works of art. The elaborate OB that cinched her waist required specialized tools and expert assistance to tie properly. Getting fully dressed was a complex ritual that required multiple attendants and could take over an hour to complete. The Mayaraya employed entire teams of specialists to support Takao's career. There were servants responsible solely for maintaining her costumes, others whose only job was mixing her cosmetics, and still others whose task was managing her correspondence with clients and admirers. Her personal maid, a woman who had dedicated her life to this single relationship, knew every preference, every habit, every requirement of her mistress's elaborate daily routine. The financial pressures that created Takao also ultimately destroyed her. Her earning potential was so enormous that her owners could not allow her to retire or marry or choose her own path. She was, quite literally, too valuable to be allowed freedom. Her tragic love affair with Yamashiro represented not just a personal choice, but a rebellion against an economic system that had invested too heavily in her perfection to permit such indulgence. The other women in the quarter watched Takao's rise and fall with complicated emotions. She represented both the ultimate achievement possible within their world and its ultimate futility. She had transcended the usual limitations of their profession, achieving fame and artistic recognition that placed her among the cultural elite of Japan. Yet she remained as trapped as any common prostitute, her gilded cage more beautiful but no less confining than theirs. In the end, Takao's story illustrates the fundamental paradox of the pleasure quarter system. It created unprecedented opportunities for women to achieve artistic and financial success, while simultaneously ensuring that such success could never translate into genuine freedom. She became immortal through her art and her tragedy, but the price of that immortality was the sacrifice of her mortality, her agency, and ultimately her life itself. Whispers from the Earth. In 1987, construction workers preparing the foundation for a modern office building in Tokyo's Minato district made a discovery that would challenge everything historians thought they knew about the fate of Feudal, Japan's forgotten women. Beneath layers of urban development, they uncovered a burial ground that had been lost to memory for over 3 centuries, a necropolis that told stories no written record had preserved. The Kushikar burial site, as archaeologists would later name it, contained the remains of over 400 women, all dating from the mid-17th to early 18th centuries. What made this discovery extraordinary was not just the number of burials, but their condition and the artifacts buried with them. These were not the graves of peasants or merchants, but of women who had once lived in luxury, yet died in circumstances that official records had systematically erased from history. Dr. Yamamoto Kenji, The forensic archaeologist who led the excavation described the site as a library written in bones, telling stories that the living were forbidden to speak. The skeletons revealed tales of lives lived in confinement, bodies shaped by the specific demands of concubine existence, and deaths that occurred far younger than the historical average. The mystery began with the bones themselves. Nearly 70% of the women had died between the ages of 16 and 25, a mortality rate that defied explanation through natural causes alone. More puzzling were the specific skeletal deformities that appeared with startling consistency across the burial population. The spine curvatures, the particular patterns of bone wear, the evidence of restricted movement, all pointed to lives lived under very specific physical constraints. The first clue to their identity came from the burial goods. Unlike typical Edo period interments, these graves contained objects that spoke of wealth and refinement. Silk fabric remnants that had somehow survived centuries of decay. Lacquered combs inlaid with mother-of-pearl, small bronze mirrors polished to perfection, and most tellingly, tiny ceramic containers that chemical analysis revealed had once held white face powder containing high levels of lead. As the excavation progressed, a pattern emerged that chilled the research team. The women had been buried in groups, often 10 or 12 at a time, suggesting simultaneous deaths rather than natural mortality over extended periods. Carbon dating confirmed that these mass burials had occurred during specific years: 1657, 1661, 1682, and 1703. These dates would later prove crucial to understanding what had happened to these forgotten women. The skeletal analysis revealed details that brought these long-dead women vividly to life. Their teeth showed the characteristic black staining of ohaguro, the tooth blackening practice mandatory for married women and high-ranking concubines. Their neck vertebrae displayed compression patterns consistent with sleeping on wooden pillows, a practice required to maintain elaborate hairstyles. Most remarkably, their finger bones showed where patterns identical to those found in musicians, evidence of countless hours spent playing traditional instruments. But it was the evidence of violence that transformed archaeological curiosity into criminal investigation across the centuries. Nearly 40% of the skeletons showed signs of trauma that could not be attributed to natural causes or accidents. Fractured skulls, broken ribs, damage to the hyoid bone in the throat that suggested strangulation. These women had not died peacefully in their sleep. The breakthrough in understanding came when Dr. Yamamoto's team cross-referenced the burial dates with historical records of major fires in Edo. The years 1657, 1661, 1682, and 1703 all corresponded with devastating conflagrations that had swept through different districts of the city. But why would fires result in the mass burial of concubines in a location far from any recorded fire damage? The answer lay in understanding the economic realities of maintaining large households of concubines during disasters. When fire threatened the lord's compound, the priority was saving the family, the important retainers, and the most valuable possessions. Concubines, regardless of their individual worth, represented a massive financial liability during evacuation. They could not be safely transported, could not be trusted with freedom, and could not be abandoned to potentially reveal household secrets to enemies. Historical investigation revealed the existence of secret protocols, never officially recorded but passed down through generations of household managers for dealing with concubines during emergencies. The euphemistic term used was securing the inner chambers, but the archaeological evidence made clear what this really meant: systematic murder disguised as accident or suicide. The lead poisoning evident in the bones told another part of the story. The white face powder that created the porcelain beauty expected of concubines contained significant amounts of lead oxide. Over years of daily application, this accumulated in their systems, causing neurological damage, reproductive problems, and premature death. Many of the women showed bone changes consistent with chronic lead poisoning, suggesting they had been slowly dying even before their violent ends. One burial in particular captured the imagination of the research team. Designated as Individual 127, she was a young woman, approximately 18 years old, whose grave goods included an unusually elaborate set of hair ornaments and a silk purse containing several gold coins. Chemical analysis of her bones revealed not only lead poisoning, but also traces of mercury and arsenic, suggesting she had been deliberately poisoned over an extended period. Most intriguingly, Individual 127 had been buried with a small lacquered box containing what appeared to be love letters written in an educated female hand. The ink had survived burial conditions remarkably well, and translation revealed passionate correspondence with someone identified only as my beloved mountain cherry. The letters spoke of secret meetings, desperate plans for escape, and growing fear of discovery. The final letter, apparently written shortly before her death, contained a chilling passage. They watch me constantly now. The tea tastes strange, and my hands shake when I try to write. If you find this, know that I chose love over safety, and regret nothing but that we could not have more time together. The archaeological team realized they were looking at evidence of a systematic cover-up that had persisted for 3 centuries. The mass graves represented not natural mortality, but organized disposal of women who had become inconvenient during times of crisis. The individual poisoning cases suggested ongoing elimination of concubines who had violated the rules of their captivity through romantic attachments or other forms of rebellion. Further investigation revealed that the Koishikawa site was not unique. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of other areas around historical Edo identified at least 6 similar burial sites, all located in areas that had been wasteland during the 17th and 18th centuries, all containing the remains of young women with similar skeletal markers. The cover-up had been remarkably thorough. No official records mentioned the deaths of large numbers of concubines during any of the fire years. Family records, when they existed, simply noted that certain women had returned to their families or entered religious life. The Buddhist temples that might have kept death records had been systematically destroyed or relocated over the centuries, their archives lost. Modern forensic techniques revealed details that would have been impossible to hide from contemporary investigators had anyone bothered to investigate. DNA analysis showed that many of the women were related, suggesting that certain families had specialized in providing daughters for concubine service across multiple generations. Isotope analysis of their teeth revealed that most had come from rural areas, consistent with the practice of purchasing girls from impoverished farming families. The skeletal evidence painted a picture of lives lived under extraordinary physical stress. The concubines showed signs of malnutrition despite their supposedly privileged status, suggesting that their diets were carefully controlled to maintain their slender figures. Many had stress fractures in their feet from walking in restrictive footwear, and compression injuries in their spines from the weight of elaborate clothing and accessories. Perhaps most disturbing were the pregnancy-related findings. Several of the younger women showed evidence of multiple pregnancies, but few had carried children to term. The pattern suggested either systematic abortion or infanticide, practices that would have been necessary to maintain the women's availability for their primary duties. The few who had given birth showed complications consistent with inadequate medical care during delivery. The archaeological team also discovered evidence of a different kind of violence. Several skeletons showed healed fractures that suggested regular physical abuse. Broken ribs that had mended poorly, fractured wrists, damaged facial bones, all indicating that these women had lived with routine brutality, despite their supposed value as prized possessions. The isotope analysis of their bones revealed another layer of control. The women's diets had been remarkably uniform, suggesting they ate only what was provided to them with no access to outside food sources. The chemical signatures in their bones showed they had consumed large amounts of rice and fish, but little meat or vegetables, creating nutritional deficiencies that would have weakened their health over time. One of the most chilling discoveries was evidence of deliberate disfigurement. Several of the older women, those who had lived past 25, showed signs of facial scarring that appeared intentional. When cross-referenced with historical documents, the team realized these might be punishment markings, permanent disfigurement inflicted on concubines who had violated household rules or fallen from favor. The discovery of children's remains in several graves added another horrifying dimension to the story. Infants and toddlers buried alongside the women, some showing signs of violence, others appearing to have died from neglect or exposure. The practice of eliminating inconvenient children, whether born to concubines or simply in the way during emergency evacuations, had left its mark in the archaeological record. Dr. Yamamoto's team also uncovered evidence of attempted escapes. Several of the women had injuries consistent with being dragged or forcibly restrained. Rope burns on wrists and ankles, shoulder dislocations from being pulled, head injuries that might have resulted from capture attempts. The skeletal evidence suggested that some of these women had fought desperately for their freedom, only to be brutally returned to captivity. The burial site itself told its own story of concealment and shame. The bodies had been interred hastily, without the usual Buddhist funeral rites that would have been expected for women of their supposed status. No grave markers, no individual identifiers, no acknowledgement of their humanity. They had been disposed of like refuse, their deaths as meaningless to their killers as their lives had been. The most haunting aspect of the discovery was the evidence of systematic record-keeping. Among the burial goods, archaeologists found small wooden tablets with numbers carved into them, suggesting that someone had maintained careful counts of the dead. This bureaucratic approach to mass murder spoke to the organized, institutional nature of the violence against these women. The discovery forced a complete re-evaluation of scholarly understanding of concubine life in feudal Japan. Previous research, based entirely on official records and literary sources, had painted a picture of pampered women living lives of luxury and security. The archaeological evidence revealed a reality far darker. Systematic exploitation, routine murder, and coordinated concealment of crimes against the most vulnerable women in Japanese society. The mystery of the vanishing concubines remains partially unsolved. While the archaeological evidence clearly documents systematic violence against these women, the full extent of the cover-up may never be known. How many burial sites remain undiscovered beneath Tokyo's urban landscape? How many women suffered similar fates in other cities across Japan? How many families participated in what amounted to a centuries-long conspiracy of silence? What is certain is that the earth itself has become the most reliable witness to lives that were systematically erased from human memory. In the careful analysis of bones and burial goods, in the chemical signatures preserved in skeletal remains, in the spatial patterns of mass graves, archaeology has given voice to women who were silenced by violence and forgotten by design. The Koishikawa women now rest in a modern ossuary, their bones finally treated with the dignity they were denied in life. A small memorial marks the site where they were discovered, bearing an inscription that reads simply, "To the unknown women whose stories we are still learning to hear." Their silence has been broken at last, but the echoes of their untold stories continue to reverberate through the corridors of historical understanding, challenging us to question what other truths lie buried beneath the official narratives of the past. The living memory of stone and bone. The impact of the Koichikawa discovery extended far beyond academic circles, creating ripples that reached into modern Japanese society in unexpected ways. When news of the burial site became public, dozens of elderly Tokyo residents came forward with family stories that had been whispered for generations. Fragments of memory that suddenly took on new significance in light of the archaeological evidence. Mrs. Tanaka Michiko, 93 years old when the excavation made headlines, approached Dr. Yamamoto with a story her grandmother had told her as a child. Her great-great-grandmother had worked as a servant in a daimyo household during the Edo period, and had spoken in hushed tones about nights when the inner chambers went silent, and carts would leave the compound under cover of darkness, returning empty before dawn. These family memories, dismissed for decades as folklore, now aligned perfectly with the archaeological timeline. Similar accounts emerged from across the city. Families whose ancestors had worked as gravediggers, cart drivers, or temple workers during the Edo period brought forward oral histories that had never been written down. These stories spoke of emergency night burials, of payments made for silence, of Buddhist monks who had refused to perform funeral rites for certain deceased women, leaving their souls unblessed and their deaths unrecorded. The psychological impact on the archaeological team was profound and lasting. Dr. Yamamoto later wrote that working with the Koichikawa remains changed his understanding not just of historical methodology, but of the responsibility researchers bear to the dead. Several team members required counseling to process the emotional weight of uncovering evidence of such systematic cruelty. The bones had become personal, each skeleton representing not just data points, but individual tragedies that demanded acknowledgement. The discovery also sparked a broader examination of archaeological sites throughout Japan. Museums and universities began reviewing their collections, looking for similar evidence that might have been overlooked or misinterpreted in previous decades. The Koichikawa methodology, combining forensic analysis with historical detective work, became a model for re-examining other mysterious burial sites across the country. 3 additional sites were identified and excavated in the years following Koichikawa, each revealing similar patterns of mass burial and evidence of violence against young women. The Shibuya site, discovered during subway construction in 1994, contained over 200 remains. The Shinjuku discovery in 1998 revealed evidence of even more systematic violence, including what appeared to be purpose-built execution chambers adjacent to the burial ground. Perhaps most significantly, the Koichikawa discovery forced a reckoning with how historical narratives are constructed and maintained. The complete absence of these women from official records raised uncomfortable questions about what other aspects of Japanese history had been systematically erased or sanitized. If hundreds of women could be murdered and buried without leaving any trace in written records, what other atrocities had been hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic silence? The forensic evidence also revealed the international dimensions of the concubine trade. Isotope analysis of teeth from some of the women indicated they had originated from Korea and China, suggesting that the system of sexual slavery extended beyond Japan's borders. This finding aligned with historical records of tribute payments and diplomatic gifts that included young women. but provided the first physical evidence of their ultimate fate. Modern DNA analysis techniques applied to the Koichikawa remains in the early 2000s, revealed family connections that painted an even darker picture of the concubine system. Several of the women were sisters, sometimes buried decades apart, suggesting that families had sold multiple daughters into the same system that had killed their siblings. The genetic evidence showed that some families had provided concubines across multiple generations, creating dynasties of sexual slavery that persisted for over a century. The discovery also influenced contemporary Japanese discussions about women's rights and historical memory. Feminist scholars used the Koichikawa evidence to challenge romanticized portrayals of traditional Japanese society, arguing that the archaeological record revealed the true cost of a system that treated women as disposable commodities. The site became a pilgrimage destination for women's rights activists, who held annual memorial services for the unnamed dead. International recognition of the Koichikawa discovery came in 2003, when the United Nations included it in a report on historical crimes against women. The site was cited as evidence of systematic sexual slavery and murder that predated by centuries the better-known atrocities of the 20th century. This recognition helped establish archaeological evidence as a legitimate tool for documenting historical human rights violations. The technological advances inspired by the Koichikawa investigation revolutionized forensic archaeology worldwide. The combination of chemical analysis, DNA testing, isotope studies, and careful historical correlation, developed by Dr. Yamamoto's team, became the gold standard for investigating suspicious mass burials. The methodology was later applied to sites from conflicts in Bosnia, Rwanda, and Cambodia, helping to document modern genocides and crimes against humanity. Today, the original Koichikawa site lies beneath a modern office complex, but the memorial garden nearby ensures that the women's stories are not forgotten again. The inscription on the memorial stone, written in both Japanese and English, serves as both remembrance and warning. Here lie the nameless ones, whose silence was purchased with their lives. May their voices, finally heard, remind us that the powerless deserve protection, not exploitation. The mystery of the vanishing concubines may never be fully solved, but their stories have acquired a permanence that their killers never intended. In breaking their silence, archaeology has ensured that these women achieve in death the recognition and dignity that was denied to them in life. The other side of the golden cage. While you, as Hanako, endure the suffocating constraints of concubine life, and while the oiran like Takao navigate the treacherous waters of the pleasure quarters, there exists yet another world of women in feudal Japan. These are the wives and daughters of the samurai elite, the Okusama, who rule over vast household domains from behind elaborate silk screens, wielding power that remains invisible to history yet shapes the very foundations of Japanese society. Lady Matsudra Chiyo represents the pinnacle of this hidden aristocracy. Born in 1642 to one of the most powerful daimyo families in Western Japan, she was destined from birth to live a life of privilege that would be unimaginable to women like you or even the celebrated Takao. Yet her golden cage, while vastly more comfortable, was no less confining than yours, its bars forged from duty, honor, and the crushing weight of ancestral expectations. At the age of 12, Chiyo's marriage was arranged to the heir of the Matsudra clan, cementing a political alliance that would influence the balance of power in 3 provinces. The negotiation took place entirely without her knowledge or consent, conducted through intermediaries who evaluated her worthiness based on her family lineage, her father's military contributions, and most importantly, her potential fertility. She learned of her engagement when presented with the first of many elaborate kimonos that would mark her transformation from child to political instrument. The wedding preparations consumed 2 full years and required the labor of hundreds of craftsmen. Chiyo's trousseau included over 300 kimono, each one a masterpiece of textile art worth more than most samurai earned in a lifetime. Her cosmetic collection filled an entire room, containing rare powders and pigments imported from China and Korea. The lacquered boxes that would contain her personal possessions were decorated by master artists whose work normally adorned temple altars. But perhaps most significant was her education in the complex art of household management. Unlike Yu, whose training focused on pleasing men, Chiyo spent her adolescence learning to command an army of servants, manage vast financial resources, and navigate the intricate political relationships that determined her family's survival. She studied the genealogies of every important family in Japan, memorizing lineages that stretched back centuries and understanding the subtle implications of each marriage alliance and inheritance pattern. Her wedding day in 1656 was a spectacle that required 3 days to complete and cost more than the annual budget of a small domain. The procession that carried her from her father's castle to her husband's stronghold stretched for over 2 miles, including palanquins carrying her possessions, guards to protect the valuable cargo, and servants whose sole responsibility was maintaining the perfect arrangement of her ceremonial robes during the journey. The wedding ceremony itself was conducted according to protocols that had remained unchanged for centuries. Chiyo wore 17 layers of silk, the combined weight nearly preventing her from walking. Her face was painted white as snow, her eyebrows shaved and redrawn high on her forehead, her teeth blackened to perfection. She became a living work of art, beautiful and completely artificial. Her natural features erased beneath layers of cosmetic transformation. Her married life began in chambers that were architectural marvels, rooms designed to showcase wealth while maintaining the rigid separation between male and female spheres that defined samurai society. Her quarters occupied an entire wing of the castle, connected to her husband's chambers by corridors that could be sealed during times of political tension. Every surface was decorated with paintings by master artists. Every piece of furniture was a work of art. Every detail was calculated to demonstrate the family's power and refinement. Yet for all this luxury, Chiyo's daily routine was as structured and confining as yours, though the constraints took different forms. She rose before dawn not to prepare herself for a lord's pleasure, but to oversee the complex machinery of aristocratic life. Her first task each morning was reviewing the household accounts, documents that recorded expenditures that would have funded entire villages. Rice purchases, silk imports, payments to craftsmen, wages for the army of servants who maintained the family's lifestyle, all required her approval and oversight. Her authority within the household was absolute, yet paradoxically limited. She commanded dozens of servants, controlled vast financial resources, and made decisions that affected the lives of thousands of people dependent on her family's domain. But she could never leave the castle without permission, could never speak directly to men outside her immediate family, and could never make any decision that might reflect poorly on her husband's reputation or political standing. The management of her husband's concubines fell under her direct authority, creating one of the most psychologically complex aspects of her role. She was expected to select, train, and oversee the women who would share her husband's bed, ensuring they remained healthy, beautiful, and compliant while suppressing any natural jealousy or resentment she might feel. This required her to become complicit in a system that reduced women to commodities, while maintaining the pretense that she was its beneficiary rather than another of its victims. Her relationship with these concubines was necessarily complicated. She held absolute power over their daily lives, controlling their schedules, their education, their medical care, and ultimately their survival within the household. Yet she also understood that their youth and beauty represented a constant threat to her own position. The delicate balance she maintained, providing enough oversight to ensure their compliance while avoiding the appearance of jealous tyranny, required political skills that would have impressed the most experienced diplomats. The birth of her children marked both her greatest triumph and her greatest vulnerability. Each pregnancy was a state occasion, monitored by teams of midwives, doctors, and political advisors who understood that the succession of the family line was too important to be left to chance. Her first son, born in 1658, secured her position within the household hierarchy, but also created new pressures as she became responsible for shaping the next generation of political leaders. Her role as mother was as formal and constrained as every other aspect of her life. The children were raised primarily by carefully selected wet nurses and tutors, while she maintained a ceremonial relationship that emphasized her status as the producer of heirs rather than as a nurturing parent. She saw her children at scheduled times, in formal settings, their interactions governed by protocols that preserved proper hierarchical relationships even within the family structure. The education she provided for her daughters was particularly poignant, as she prepared them for lives that would mirror her own experience of luxurious captivity. She taught them the arts of household management, the subtle skills of political navigation, and the emotional disciplines required to suppress personal desires in favor of family duty. She was, in effect, training them to accept the same constraints that had shaped her own existence, perpetuating a system that she understood intimately but could never escape. Her sons received a different kind of preparation, education in military arts, political strategy, and the cultivation of the personal authority they would need to command respect in a world where physical courage and political cunning determined survival. She watched them grow into young men who would possess the freedom she could never experience, while ensuring they understood their obligations to the women who would serve their households as she had served theirs. The seasonal rhythms that governed aristocratic life provided structure but little genuine variety to her existence. Spring brought the elaborate rituals of cherry blossom viewing, ceremonies that required weeks of preparation and strict adherence to protocols that dictated everything from the selection of appropriate poems to the arrangement of food presentations. Summer festivals demanded different costumes, different protocols, different performances of refined femininity that demonstrated the family's cultural sophistication. Autumn meant preparing for the winter isolation that would confine the household to the castle for months, requiring careful management of food, stores, fuel, supplies, and the entertainment that would occupy long evenings when travel became impossible. Winter itself was a test of her organizational skills, as she maintained household morale and productivity during the harsh months when the outside world became inaccessible. The religious obligations that punctuated her calendar provided some of her few opportunities for meaningful spiritual reflection, though even these were constrained by political considerations. Her visits to family temples were elaborate processions that demonstrated piety while reinforcing social hierarchies. Her prayers were offered not for personal fulfillment, but for the prosperity of the domain, the health of her family, and the continuation of the political stability that sustained their privileged position. Her correspondence with other aristocratic women created a network of information and influence that operated parallel to the formal political channels dominated by men. Through carefully coded letters that discussed poetry, seasonal observations, and family news, she participated in a shadow diplomacy that could influence marriage negotiations, military alliances, and economic partnerships. These relationships required constant cultivation and careful management, as a misunderstood phrase or inappropriate gesture could have consequences that extended far beyond personal embarrassment. The artistic pursuits that filled her leisure hours were not mere hobbies, but essential demonstrations of cultural refinement that reflected on her family's status. Her skill at poetry composition, flower arrangement, and tea ceremony were evaluated by other aristocratic women whose opinions could enhance or damage her social standing. Every creative work she produced was simultaneously personal expression and political statement, carrying messages about her education, her taste, and her family's cultural values. As she aged, Lady Chiyo's role evolved from active household manager to elder advisor, her accumulated knowledge and political connections making her invaluable to the next generation of family leaders. Her sons sought her counsel on marriage negotiations and political strategies, while her daughters-in-law looked to her for guidance in managing their own household responsibilities. She became the repository of family memory, the keeper of genealogical knowledge and political histories that could not be entrusted to written records. Her understanding of her own position grew more complex with experience. She recognized that her luxurious captivity was both privilege and prison, that her authority was both real and illusory, that her influence was both significant and constrained by forces beyond her control. She had achieved everything that society deemed possible for a woman of her station. Yet she understood that her achievements were defined entirely by her relationships to the men who officially held power. The contrast between her life and yours could not be more stark. Yet both experiences illustrate the fundamental limitations placed on women in feudal Japanese society. Where you face direct subjugation and potential violence, she navigates subtle constraints and psychological pressure. Where you have no voice in your destiny, she exercises carefully circumscribed authority within predetermined boundaries. Where you live in obscurity, she performs her role on a stage where every gesture is observed and evaluated. Yet in her private moments, looking out through the silk screens that separate her from the world beyond the castle walls, Lady Chiyo perhaps understands something that connects her experience to yours and to Takao's tragic story. Despite all the differences in their circumstances, despite the vast gulfs in wealth and status and opportunity, all three women lived lives defined by their relationships to male power, their value measured by their ability to serve male needs, their ultimate worth determined by their success in fulfilling roles they had no part in choosing. The cherry blossoms that bloom each spring outside her window are the same ones that you glimpse from your small room in the concubine quarters, the same ones that Takao watched from the Yoshiwara, the same ones that witnessed the silent burial of the women whose bones now testify to centuries of hidden violence. In their brief beauty and inevitable fall, they reflect the lives of all the women whose stories we have followed, lives that bloomed brilliantly within the constraints imposed upon them, then faded into memory, leaving only whispers of what might have been in a world that offered women different choices. The weight of silk and memory as we reach the end of our journey through the hidden worlds of feudal Japan's women. We find ourselves surrounded by echoes that still resonate across the centuries. The clicking of wooden sandals on polished floors, the rustle of silk kimono, the soft scratch of brushes on rice paper, the whispered conversations behind screens that revealed everything and concealed even more. From Hanako's daily struggle for survival in the Concubine, quarters to Lady Chiyo's elaborate performance of aristocratic duty, from Tako's tragic defiance in the Yoshiwara to the silent testimony of bones discovered beneath Tokyo's modern streets, we have traced the intricate patterns of lives lived within constraints that seem almost unimaginable today. Yet perhaps what emerges most clearly from these stories is not their distance from our modern world, but their troubling familiarity. The systems that reduced women to commodities, that measured their worth by their ability to please and serve, that offered them limited choices within structures they could never escape. These patterns echo through history in forms both obvious and subtle. The archaeological discoveries that revealed the fate of so many forgotten women remind us that historical narratives are constructed by those with power to write them, and that the voices of the powerless can be silenced not just by violence, but by the systematic erasure of their experiences from official memory. The bones of the Koishikawa women speak more honestly than any chronicle written by court historians. Their testimony carved in calcium and preserved in earth that remembers what human memory was forced to forget. These stories also illuminate the complex relationship between privilege and freedom, showing us how even the most luxurious captivity remains captivity, how even the most celebrated success within an oppressive system still operates according to that system's fundamental rules. Lady Chiyo's silk screens and Hanako's paper walls served the same essential function, separating women from a world they could observe but never fully enter on their own terms. The beauty that runs through all these stories, the aesthetic refinement and artistic achievement that feudal Japanese society cultivated to extraordinary heights, becomes more poignant when we understand the human cost of its creation. The elaborate kimono, the perfect tea ceremonies, the exquisite poetry, the architectural marvels. All of these cultural treasures were built upon a foundation of women's constrained lives and suppressed dreams. But there is also resistance in these stories, moments when individual women found ways to assert their humanity despite the systems designed to deny it. Takao's choice to love according to her own heart rather than her economic value. The anonymous letter writer whose words survived her death. Lady Chiyo's subtle exercise of authority within impossible constraints. Even Hanako's small acts of mental rebellion against her circumstances. All of these represent victories of spirit over structure, reminders that human dignity persists even under the most oppressive conditions. As you settle into sleep, carried by the gentle rhythms of these historical tales, perhaps you'll dream of cherry blossoms that bloom not just for the powerful, but for all the unnamed women whose lives created the complex tapestry of the past, their stories finally told. Join the chorus of voices that remind us that history belongs not just to those who wielded swords and commanded armies, but to everyone who lived, loved, suffered, and dreamed within the constraints of their time. The silk screens have fallen, the wooden sandals have stopped clicking, the last love letters have been buried with their authors, but their echoes remain woven into the fabric of memory, reminding us that understanding the past requires listening not just to the voices that were officially recorded, but to the whispers that survived in bones and artifacts, in family stories and archaeological discoveries, in the spaces between the official words, where the real lives of real people played out their complex, constrained, and ultimately human stories. Sleep well, knowing that in remembering these forgotten women, we honor not just their individual struggles, but the long human journey toward a world where such stories might finally be impossible to tell.